Bruins Beat, brought to you by Ice Picks and the Game Time app.
And welcome into the Bruins Beat, presented by Prize Picks. Go use that promo code CLNS to get up to $100 cash back on that first deposit. And we're presented by Game Time. Use that promo code CLNS to get $20 off that first purchase. Terms apply. I am Evan Marinofsky. That is Conor Ryan. Connor, what is up?
Evan, I'm doing well. How you doing?
Doing great. Basically had my last weekend of the summer. Went to Ogunquit, Maine for the weekend. Girlfriend
Very
and I
nice.
celebrated our 2-year anniversary. Ogunquit
Congratulations.
says, I love Ogunquit. I grew up going there. Like, that is, I think it's just peak vacation land summer, like in the Northeast. So sad that it's kind of over now. Like, summer's pretty much done. Kids are going back to school, and it's just, I don't know, the cooler weather's coming in. Somehow September will be like 1,000 degrees every day.
Probably, which
but
sucks.
Yeah, but summer's coming to a close. And as we've said before, we welcome fall. We're a pro fall podcast and pro winter,
Yeah.
obviously,
Oh,
because that's when we
absolutely.
have the most talk about.
It's one, the fact that there's more to talk about. Two, it's like I think the best weather. Like I'm listen, there's times when it's the summertime and it's like 85 and it's great, but like nice 60 degrees, shorts and sweatshirt, or you can throw on a pair of jeans and like a little light flannel. Best kind of weather. Again, it's not been the case. It feels like the last couple of years it's been like, hey, it's like middle of September. How about it be like a nice 88-degree day? And then it just stays that way. And then we get to like end of October and it goes from like 88 and way too warm to like 45. It's like there's no we don't hit that median spot anymore. But hopefully there's a few more of those kind of days carved out for us moving forward. Get some apple cider donuts, get a few apples, ready for the hockey season, basketball season. Football is starting up. It's a good time of year, Evan.
It is. It's a fun time. We're on the cusp of it. And one thing that's coming up soon, Bruins training camp. And today I wanted to kind of look at sort of the pre-training camp questions we have. Going into training camp, going into captain's practices. What are the things that I have questions about, that you have questions about? Sort of storylines that we need answering. And we don't have the answers today, unfortunately. So you will not be getting the answers to those questions. Today it's like we're teachers putting together a test. We have the questions, but you don't get to know the answers yet. It's gonna be a little while. So I think the biggest pre-training camp question, and maybe this will be answered before training camp starts. I think Bruins fans certainly hope that that's the case. But I think easily the biggest pre-training camp question is, when does Jeremy Swayman sign? And then the part B to that question is, what does that contract look like? We've kind of speculated all summer. We've thrown out figures. We've looked at comparables, although there are not many. We've looked at all the factors, and I think we've ruled out, him going elsewhere. I don't think he's going to be getting traded to a team or anything like that. But in terms of when he signs, what he's going to sign for, that probably is the biggest question looming over them, because I think if they go into training camp and he's not on the ice for those first couple days, even though we know it's probably going to happen, it's still jarring when you see your goalie of the future, your number one guy, a franchise pillar, potentially not out there. So to me, I think that's the biggest question going into training camp.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think you look at it, Evan, it's what we've said before. I don't think there's going to be any dramatic results here of an offer sheet or like, negotiations, falling to the wayside, or it being like, all right, we're settling on a 2-year bridge deal, which I don't think anyone wants, right? I think you just want it to be over with and have your guy locked in. But of course, like, even if we're not, projecting these worst case scenarios, you like to have your whole offseason to-do list kind of wrapped up with a bow before you get to this point, right? Like, it's still just something that's looming over this team. And it's not just, DeBrusque or a player that's like a key piece or whatever that like you're just hoping to sign and get that done with. Like, you're talking about your franchise goalie, a guy who was arguably the best goalie in the playoffs last year, even though he only played 2 rounds. A guy that I think Bruins fans should be excited about, not just where he is now, but where he can be in another couple of years, and especially running with kind of the opportunity as that number one goalie. But we're still kind of in that waiting game. Again, my questions do not revolve around necessarily the whether it's going to get done, or necessarily like the fears of this going into deep into preseason play where we just have Corpusalo and Bussy for the first 2 weeks of the preseason. Like you hope it doesn't get to that point. I'm just fascinated to see just what the final, when all parties kind of put pen to paper, what the term's going to be and what the payout's going to be, because it sure kind of feels like all parties would want a long-term deal, but who knows? Like maybe Swayman's looking for like 4 or 5 years and hit the market again. Maybe the Bruins have questions over, maybe they want to see how he does a full year, with like 55, 60 games played, like how he does there. I personally would just sign him to the longest term deal ever, and just not worry about it. Have, rip up the CBA, do the Ilya Kovalchuk, like 25-year contract that he signed that like the NHL was like,
Yes.
we can't do this. No more of this. But again, you hope that it's like 8 years, 8.5, and you just, get it over and done with. And that's a contract that if Swayman lives up to his potential, he should, fall honestly within market value in the next couple of years in terms of where other guys behind him, like Ottinger and Shesterkin, are going to make. But it remains to be seen. That's what I expect is a deal kind of like that. But if all of a sudden we look at it and it's a 5-year deal, or it's, maybe below or higher than what we projected, I wouldn't be surprised. It's so tough just to gauge where you look at just his age, the state of the market, his representatives, and there's a couple of guys with track records of dragging out these negotiations quite a bit as well. And it's just so tough to look at it and find like a comparable or a barometer as to where this ultimately is going to land, just in terms of the term and the payout.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I also I go back to, and we've, discussed this 1,000 times, but there's the whole argument of like, oh, they want to see what they have in him and before really committing a ton of money long term. And I think the danger with that is always, well, he proves himself right, and then you're paying him way more than you would have initially paid him. And I said this to Diver the other day. There's a whole idea, that same idea, where it's like, get him on sort of this prove me deal. If the Bruins give him a 3-year deal, if they did like a bridge deal to see really what he was made of, they would almost be betting that he's not going to be worth what they'd give him now.
Yeah.
And that's kind of a weird position to put yourself in, where it's like, well, we think you're going to be good, but not that good. And I think there is that element there where maybe it motivates Jeremy Swayman, where it's like, hey, you guys aren't going to believe in me. I'm going to go sicko mode for 3 straight years. And suddenly it's like, oh, and the Bruins like, oh, we did it right. It's like Belichick with Tom Brady, where it's like, we're going to poke and prod this guy forever and make him think he's the worst when he's really the best. But I am curious when this gets done. I've maintained, I think it's going to be right before camp, sometime in the next 2 weeks. I was on the beach Saturday and Sunday, and all I could think of was like, yeah, that Swayman contract completely happened, and I have no service, and whatever, but it probably happened. Didn't happen, obviously. So that's sort of my first big question. A follow-up one to that, and it kind of comes into hand in hand with signings. You and I have talked about this quite a bit. Do they go for any PTOs? And if they do, who are they? Now, we've discussed some guys, Pacioretty, Blake Wheeler. I almost said Kasper's Documents instead of Kyler Yamamoto. I don't know why that came in my head.
I don't think they'll be perusing the market for Kasper's Documents again. But
it's a shame.
It's all about being creative, right, Evan? Who are we to judge?
It's a shame. They could use him again. They could use a guy to
maybe
miss
he's
a
like
couple
Benjamin
nets.
Button, the older he gets, like the quicker his skating ability is. Like his legs get fresher the older he gets.
That would be awesome. That would be a really good trait to have. But so Wheeler, Pacioretty, Kyler Yamamoto, Tyler Johnson, Kevin LeBanc were some guys that we've mentioned kind of up front. I think they do sign someone because they do love internal competition. So I think that's going to happen. Do you think they lean one way or the other? Because again, like Wheeler and Pacioretty are sort of cut from the same cloth and the kind of PTO they would be, older veterans who have stumbled on some injury issues, Pacioretty more of a scorer, Wheeler more of a setup guy. And then you have guys like Yamamoto, LeBanc, who are younger, maybe some of that untapped potential. What way do you think the Bruins might lean if they're going to go for a PTO?
Yeah, I probably think I would imagine it'd be probably someone who's probably more of an established veteran player that they want to just see how much maybe is left in the tank, and maybe it's a guy that could push for like a middle six spot if all works out, right? I don't think they're gonna get Yamamoto and LeBanc and like a Johnson or someone like that, right? Where it's guys that necessarily maybe if they work out, like if Yamamoto works out, is he a guy that you could see being like a 20 goal, like 40-point guy? I feel like he's kind of like a plug and play, like third line guy, which it feels like you have way too many like bottom six players that again you can really mix and match what you have there, but between Frederick and Geeky and Coyle, if you have him down there, Patra, you got like even guys that probably aren't making the team, Riley Duran, Max Jones, Justin Brazeau, who's not set in stone for where he's going to be in the lineup. You have a lot of guys on it that I wouldn't necessarily block, especially if it's a guy like a Brazeau. I'd rather you see what you have in a guy like Brazeau, who's a really intriguing young player, as opposed, not saying Yamamoto's not, but I'd like you see what you have in house as opposed to looking for a guy that maybe would take a spot in the lineup like that. Now, if you think that Blake Wheeler or someone like an older veteran who's got a pretty solid track record has more to give, you just want to see how much is left in the tank, I'm all for that. Because if like Blake Wheeler, discovers the fountain of youth, or he's a guy that could give you 45, if he's a Dogovins and just gets better with age. But if he's a guy that, if healthy, could give you like 40-ish points, and maybe he's like the guy that if a guy like Lysell doesn't work out, or you don't want to promote a guy like Geeky or Frederick to a top six role, if a guy like Wheeler's with, Coyle and Marchand is kind of the distributor on that line and it works out, I don't think there's any harm in trying out one of those guys. So I'm all for one or two players that maybe fits more of that role. I wouldn't like all of a sudden add 3 or 4 guys and further crowd a lineup that has a lot of intriguing pieces, but I feel like there's just way too many cooks in the kitchen in terms of necessarily where you want that whole lineup to work out. I don't want to be blocking way too many of these younger players. We need to see what these young guys have going into this year.
I agree, and I think that's sort of the thing where you have these young guys, which we'll get to in a second. You have established third and fourth line guys as is. They're all battling with each other already. I don't think you need more guys who are going to compete with those guys. You have enough. Your big hole is that second line right wing spot. And this kind of leads to my third question, which we'll get to in a second. But that's where sort of a Pacioretty comes in. That's where a Blake Wheeler comes in. Those guys have filled those spots before. If Fabian Lysell doesn't work out, you have a guy like a Blake Wheeler in house. You have a guy like a Pacioretty there. And if they are in that position, maybe they slot in on that second line and sort of draw those minutes. But again, as we said, when Bergeron and Krejci came back, these are Band-Aids to longer term issues where, like, if Lysell does not work out on that second line right wing spot, you've got to figure something out there because, is that long-term option in-house? You'd hope, but we'll see. I want to get to that Lysell question because that's sort of my third question. If you guys couldn't tell already, it's been a big question. We've talked about Fabian Lysell a little bit this summer, but first, quick word from our friends over at Prize Picks. Prize Picks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. Prize Picks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Unlike other apps, on Prize Picks, it's just you against the numbers. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. Get in on the daily action with your friends and become part of the Prize Picks community today. Sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. One Caleb Williams passing yard gets you 1 win on Prize Picks every week in September. That's right. Only 1 yard gets you an automatic win every football weekend in September. That's 4 weeks of free W's. Don't miss this deal on Prize Picks because it's gone when September ends. Prize Picks is the best way to win real money this football season. Which players are going off? Which players aren't? Make your picks in less than 60 seconds and turn your sports opinions into real money all season long on Prize Picks. Will Patrick Mahomes throw for more or less than 4,300 yards? Will CJ Stroud's sophomore season result in more or less than 4,150 yards? Enter your season picks before week 1 kicks off. Download the Prize Picks app today and use code CLNS for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, that's code CLNS on Prize Picks for a deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks, run your game. So my third biggest question pre-training camp is, can Fabian Lysell grab that second line right wing spot? Going back to development camp, going back to Sweeney's comments post free agency, it sort of led everyone to think, this second line right wing spot seems to be Fabian Lysell's for the taking. And, he's sort of had a mixed experience here with the Bruins. There's been some ups and downs in Providence for sure. Some of them injury related, some of them just on ice related. When him and I talked, he talked a lot about sort of that adjustment period being longer than others have had to endure, coming over from Sweden, adjusting to sort of the style of play here. And it takes time for guys. It's not always immediate. Not everyone just comes in and lights the world on fire. And I think he's a good example of that. Now, can he be the long-term fix at second line right wing? Certainly has the ceiling to do so. He's the 21st overall pick from that 21. We used the 21 pick, right? I'm not remembering.
Yes. I feel like there wasn't like a pick like vacated or something like that. Like I feel like it might have, depending on how you word it, but I do believe he was 21st overall.
Yeah, memory serves you. I wanted to make sure it wasn't just because he was the 21 draft. I'm like, he was 21 overall too.
Yeah,
but I think he was. But again, first round pick, has that skill, all that stuff. What are sort of your expectations for him in camp?
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating, right? Because you look at this team that has so many, established veterans, so many guys they added in free agency who clearly are more important to the overall success of this team. Guys like Elias Lindholm and Zadorov and all those guys. But Lysell, who's not played one game in the NHL, is such a consequential player this year because you just look at that vacancy in that top six where if he runs with that opportunity, and again, not saying that you need this guy to be a 25 goal scorer. If you can give you 15 goals and 40-ish points in a set role like that and show a lot of promise, like how much that opens up everything else for this team. It's such a major question mark. And again, as we've said before, they do have other options they can turn to. They can turn to Morgan Geekie or Frederick or someone else like that if they wanted to. They can address it at the trade deadline because every single, we get to February and March and it feels like there's 10, 20 goal scorers who get dangled out on the market. And I'm sure that'll happen once again. So they do have options, but in terms of just making things easier for themselves, if a young player like Lysell, who has that skill that I think Bruins fans have been so intrigued by, of having a player with that kind of skill set added to their pipeline, if he can run with that opportunity and just look like he belongs, right? Don't put extra. Same with kind of like a guy like Lohrei, where I think people are very excited to see how he does. He's the third pairing guy getting second power play reps. Like, have him just get established, get comfortable in that spot, and show that he can really build off of his NHL career moving forward. If Lysell can show you that, it'd be huge for this team moving forward in terms of just having that spot. Because if you have a homegrown player like that who's not making a lot of money, who can fill that top six when you already probably have like Zacha, Lindholm, Pastrnak, Coyle, Marchand, Lysell, and it allows you to kind of keep guys like a Geekie and a Frederick who are really good. They can step in when needed, but it's kind of like how we probably thought Coyle was a few years ago, right? Of like, great 3C. I don't want to put him up any further. Maybe like a guy like Geekie could prove us wrong, but like if your third line all of a sudden is, you have guys like a Geekie and a Frederick down there full time, pretty good. They're going to take advantage of their matchups as well. So just the domino effect of if Lysell can kind of prove his worth is going to be so huge for this team. So I'm really excited to see what he can do, how he adjusts to the NHL level. And I think also the onus has to be on the Bruins that if he has a poor preseason or he has, he hits a wall, as all rookies do, stay the course. Because I think you need to find out what you have in this player as opposed to continuing to kind of put these guys in limbo when it feels like they've reached their peak down in the AHL.
I was gonna say, like, if he has kind of a preseason, or his first 10 games in the NHL are like 2 points, keep at it. Like, I want to see an extended big sample so that hey, we put him in for 30 games, he gave us 3 goals and 5 assists. And it's like, okay, you have a pretty good idea there in a 30-game sample size. But I think what he ends up being, and I've sort of stayed pretty consistent on this, I think he's a fine option there. I think this season, at least, points-wise, I think, he's not going to light the world on fire. You shouldn't expect him to do that. I don't think he's going to be a bust. I think he's somewhere, if he over an 82-game pace, somewhere in the 15 to 18 goal range, 35, 40 points. I think somewhere in there, especially if he's playing with a Coyle and a Marchand. Again, the lines could be completely different, but if that's who he is playing with, you're going to pick up some points there. And I know that's not the most dynamic offensive line, but if you can get that, I don't think that's expecting too much. I know he has not played a game yet in the NHL, but given his skill, his abilities, where he'll be in the lineup, I don't think that 40-point range is crazy. I don't. I don't.
No.
I think just given what he can do. And again, Connor, I mean, if people want to go watch Fabian Lysell and the Bruins, or you want to watch football, you want to watch basketball, Game Time. Our good friends over at Game Time. Fall is beginning, which means football is back. And nothing beats a college football atmosphere. With both college and NFL games, who doesn't love a good tailgate? Get to the game with Game Time. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets to see your favorite teams play live even easier. And Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. This fall, my friends and I are going to the Patriots-Titans game in Tennessee. How will we get tickets for the game? Game Time, of course. The super deal has been amazing to us in the past, and there's no doubt it will be great to us again. I just love the curated deals, which make it easier to find the best price on great seats. Some other features I love are the lowest price guarantee, or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Game Time Picks. Curation makes it easier to save more on sports, comedy, and theater. All-in pricing. Toggling this feature shows the total up front with no surprise fees at checkout. So, take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code CLNS for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. Now, back to the show. So another question I have, I'd say it's definitely in my top 5. And you and I, Connor, have discussed this a little bit. I think it's going to become more of a discussion. It's sort of what the future of Jim Montgomery is with the Bruins as head coach. Going into that final year of a contract, we don't have word yet of an extension. I believe Bruce Cassidy's extension came right before that 1920 season, and I want to say it was it pre-training camp? I think he had more than 1 year left on his deal, I think.
Yeah.
For whatever deal he had.
I believe that was the case, yeah. So, I mean, there was never a time for Cassidy, especially where he was kind of a lame duck coach, or kind of coaching. I say coaching for his job, he literally was fired, but he didn't have 1 year left in his contract, or was in limbo in terms of going into his season, like Montgomery is, at least for right now.
Yeah, never happened. And so again, with Montgomery, I think the biggest thing is the regular season success has been there in spades. I mean, you look at 22-23, best regular season team ever. 23-24, massively overperformed. Most models, most expectations, with a roster that, as we've called them 1,000 times, are the Moneyball Bruins, Van Riemsdyk and others like that. It's been the playoffs that have sort of been his heel. And I've said this before, I don't know how you have a coach an entire season and be like, all right, well, doesn't matter what you do in the regular season because you've done that already, but it matters what you do in the playoffs. So you got to win 2 rounds to come back next year. I mean, never mind just the stress that puts on your job, but that also puts a lot of stress on you, your family. He has kids, houses, and all. It's living somewhere long term. I think they'll really extend him. I do. I think that's sort of the route that they take. I think if there was ever a time to make a move, it was back when the season ended, because you had whole slew of coaches and things like that if you felt the need to make a change. And if they'd lost to Toronto, I think we might have been having very different conversations than we ended up having back in April and May. I think he ends up getting extended. But what do you think ends up happening?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely kind of a precarious spot to be in if you're Jim Montgomery. As you said, there's so much other things beyond just the day-to-day, the X's and O's, the part of the job it weighs on you. If you already have the pressure of being this team that has, championship aspirations in this market after the last couple of years, to then, kind of be in this state of limbo going forward. It does feel like they will, give him an extension so he can kind of breathe a little easier there. Again, that's not to say that if they extend him and then this year goes by the wayside or it's another disappointing playoff run, doesn't put his job in peril again. But yeah, it's very rare you see any coach kind of go into the year on that 1 year remaining, kind of in that just very weird spot. So I agree they probably will get a deal done, but maybe it's something where it's like a couple months into the year. Maybe it's something like how it is in November. You see how they are. There's that what's that barometer for like Thanksgiving teams that are in the playoffs then tend to make it, or maybe that's kind of how they view it. Maybe the Bruins want to see like, all right, the numbers have been great the last couple of years when you had Swayman and Ullmark. How do you juggle that kind of rotation now moving forward without having kind of a safety blanket in Ullmark, who, if you were in a rut or Swayman wasn't playing well, you could roll this other great goalie and kind of get back in the win column pretty easily, or at least get a few points back in the standings. You have that. You have, the team has invested a lot of money in these free agents. How do you utilize them? One of the things that was marketed about Montgomery coming here was playing younger players. Let's see it. If, we're at a point in November and December where Lysell is just not getting enough playing time, or, it's not worked out, right? If it's more of like a situation last year where it's like, if we get to November and Lysell's playing, 14 minutes a night and has 1 goal and 4 assists over 20 games, you're like, all right, I don't know what really to make of him there. But if Lysell is playing every couple of games, playing 11 minutes a night in a third, a third line, fourth line role, it's like, all right, this is not. We need to develop these guys. You need to give these guys some leeway, some runway here to develop. If he's not doing those kind of things that I think was kind of marketed as to his thing, maybe that changes the opinion of the Bruins as to whether they want to keep him long term. But I could see it as opposed to like the Swayman thing where you feel like they get done in training camp. Maybe that's something where Bruins see just where this team is, in November and December, and then kind of go from there. Because I imagine they want to extend him. That seems like the best move for all parties in terms of just the baseline results. But maybe Bruins want to see just a little bit more before they commit that next contract.
Well, I like they bring in like Steve Kornacki from MSNBC to like in
Yes.
November to be like, well, you're projected to be here by the end of the year and all that. It's an interesting point you make about doing it, a few months into the season, mid-season, sort of seeing where the team's at. Now, I think if they don't extend him before training camp or during training camp, I think if they get out to a slow start in October, I would guess that he is very much on the hot seat. If they are 500 mid-November, I think that they are looking to make a change. Given that he would be going into the last year of his deal, all that, get the fresh voice in, bolster yourself up for the playoffs, all that stuff. I could see that. Whereas again, in contrast, I think if, this isn't saying anything crazy, I think if they're rolling and they're playing to expectations, they're beating some expectations, November, December, I think then you probably would see an extension where it's like, all right, they seem to be in a pretty good spot for the playoffs. That's 3 straight years of Monty, having a pretty solid ship throughout the regular season. Let's see what they do in the playoffs. But again, I don't. That's also a risky move to extend the coach. During the year, you also don't want to sour those negotiations, right? If there's a higher percentage chance you do want to extend him, and you go, well, we're gonna wait a little while here. You don't want his side of the negotiations to just be like, all right, like screw this place. I don't want to be here anymore. And again, there's no sign that that's the case. He just did the event in Lewiston, Maine this past weekend for the Bruins, but I think you also have to consider that with just his keeping him long term. If you are going to keep him long term, don't piss him off.
Yeah,
I think that's also important when it comes to Montgomery.
It is going to be kind of maybe a fascinating, kind of a slept on storyline for right now. Because also don't forget, kind of similar to the year before they moved on from Julian and Bruce Cassidy got the promotion. People were like, oh, this is a guy that if things kind of hit the wayside, could be in the mix. Who did the Bruins add to the coaching staff? Oh, Jay Leach. Jay Leach is back. I
Yeah.
keep tabs on that as well. So,
Huh. Speaking of Bruins assistant coaches, you know who walked by my table? I was having dinner at Gunkwood on Friday night. Kevin Dean walked right past the table. I was like, I did one of those
I
like,
thought it was
I
gonna
was
be Blades.
Blades walked past my table. I would be like, Blades! Oh my God, Blades! It was you actually in the Blades costume.
Yes.
I was like eating dinner. And I look up and I was like, huh? And I don't know. We don't know each other at all. But I'm like, what the hell? And Veer was like, what? Who is that? I was like, it doesn't matter to her, but I'm like, yeah, it was a assistant coach. Just wow, that just so random to see. He's in Chicago now, right? He's with the Blackhawks.
I think so.
I think he's still with the Blackhawks.
Yeah,
I think he's still with the Blackhawks.
Yeah.
They're supposed to be a better team this year. They'll be a little bit more interesting of a product. I don't know how much more interesting, but better than last year. Bedard back but they sound like Teravainen, and they signed a couple other guys.
They signed a whole squad of guys. So
yeah, I'm curious to see what they do. I was thinking this morning, and this isn't one of my questions, but we're talking about it right now. Like James Haggs is the clear number one, or as of right now, is the clear number one pick for next year. Generational, transformative talent, sort of like the next Jack Hughes. I was like, San Jose is going to be a little bit better, but still probably going to be near the bottom of the league.
Pretty ass.
Yeah, I mean, but if they got Haggs, like if that team suddenly had Celebrini, Haggs, Will Smith, like that's wild.
Hockey West.
Legit. And then they have Anaheim with Gauthier, but Anaheim's another team that probably won't be very good.
Mm-hmm.
The Utah Hockey Club should be okay. Shut up, El Frazier, by the way. Lasted, right out to covering the Utah Hockey Club. So congrats to her.
Yes, absolutely.
But I like the worst team I haven't looked at the odds yet, but I would assume Sharks, Ducks, Blackhawks. Am I forgetting someone?
I feel like that's probably the safe pick, those kind of teams. There's probably some team out east that I'm not thinking about. Like watch like Buffalo suck again this year or someone else like really that. Funny. But trying to think.
The Canadians will be a little bit better.
They'll be a little bit better. I feel like Columbus might get a little bit better, right? I think they've made a few moves. Yeah. They got enough younger guys that you expect would take a step forward. So I feel like it's gonna be those teams out west.
The Flyers, I don't know, would they suck enough? I mean, they were okay last year, but they
got Mitchkov now, and they got a few younger players. So, but
yeah, so I don't know.
I think it's gonna be those West Coast teams. Those teams are butt.
Pathetic. Yeah, I think it's gonna be one of them. But again, like for Bruins fans, you'll be watching a lot of BC this year because of Dean Letourneau. So I would also say James Haggs is another good reason to watch. Just given how good of a talent he is. Sorry to say it, Connor.
Except when they play BU.
Except when they play BU, of course. Yeah, you're right. I think it's gonna be a team out west. Maybe it'll be the Bruins. Who knows? That'd be fun.
Interesting season.
Yeah, it would be an interesting season. My last big question, and there's others, of course, that are. We haven't really touched on defense at all, but I think there are bigger questions up front. Matt Poitras and Georgi Merkulov. We already discussed Lysell, whether or not he'll make the team. Does Poitras make the team? Does Merkulov make the team? Diver and I talked about this a lot last week. Merkulov has sort of grown out of the AHL in the sense that he's sort of done all you can do down there.
Point per game player.
Yeah, like are you going to have him there for third year? Matt Poitras looked really good at the NHL level last year, still very young, has never played in the AHL, coming off shoulder surgery. Which one makes the team? I think it's going to be hard for both to make it, given that unless Merk goes off and they want to put him on the wing in the top six, which again, I think that's a slim chance. I think he is definitely a center. You have Lindholm, you have Coyle, you've got Zacha. You're pretty set with top six centers. I'm starting to think it's one or the other. So I'm curious what your take on those two guys are.
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes down to how you use them in the preseason. Again, it better be something where I think I was speaking last week to Ty about it. It's how I think like the first game for Lysell in preseason, it was him with like Jason Megna, and someone else. I'm like, all right, so this is like Providence's top line. Like, I want to see these guys with a Pasternak. I want to see these guys with a Lindholm or a Coyle or a Marchand and see what you can bring out of these players. So I think, especially in this preseason, if it is one or the other, which is probably the case starting out the year, and again, make the case that Merkulov like has already hit his ceiling. You could easily make the argument if you're the Bruins of like, all right, we love Patra. We expect him to be with this team at some point, but maybe we open the year with him in Providence, get him back up to speed, see how that shoulder is, have him feel confident about his game, because he could be a guy that I would see go down there and could be a point per game guy out of the gate with just how he produces and what his skill set is. But we'll see. I think you need to have a preseason where at least both those guys are getting legitimate top 6 minutes with NHL level talent and seeing how they kind of run with it. Because again, you see the numbers with guys like Merkulov in Providence. You see the highlights every year as he's lighting things up in the AHL. Then he goes up to Boston and plays 4 games, 8 minutes a night, and you get nothing out of that, right? Like
Nothing.
Now is the time to see what these guys can do in those spots. So I do think it probably would be one or the other. You kind of weigh like, do you feel more confident with a guy like Patra who's done it before? But again, let's see what Merkulov can do. And again, if it hits a point where all of a sudden you've got a good problem on your hands, if Merkulov lights things up and is like your 3 seed to start the year, and Patra's in Providence gaining confidence and putting himself in a spot to come back up later on this year, that would be a great problem to have. If all 3 of Merkulov, Patra, and Lysell hit, like you've got a great problem on your hand in terms of fitting those guys in a lineup with already a lot of capable NHL players already in place. So, but I do agree that probably I think it's going to be one or the other to start the year. But if it's Patra being the odd man out, but he gets to play 19, 20 minutes a night in Providence out of the gate and build his strength back up, I also don't think that's the worst thing in the world. But it also falls on Merkulov to prove himself.
It does. Patra also is 20 and does not turn 21 until March.
Yeah.
So you have someone who is still extremely young, very ahead of schedule. It's not a demotion for him to go to Providence and play an extended period of time there. I mean, he's coming off of major shoulder surgery and just, looking great in the NHL. I mean, he had some highlight reel plays in the NHL last year, no doubt. But just the way that Merkulov is trending and how much he's played over the last 2 years of professional hockey would lead everyone, I think, to believe he might be more of a fit for that third line right now than Patra is, and that Patra needs a little bit more seasoning. And I think that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But again, we'll see. I'm curious to see how this plays out, but we don't know the answers yet, Connor. This training camp has not happened. I'm excited, though, for when training camp finally does come around, because it's something to do. That's why. Something to do. Connor, what can the people look forward to from you over at the Globe and Boston.com?
Yeah, we'll have covered every step of the way with training camp starting up. We'll have a preview ahead of time. We'll have roster battles to look for, prospect profiles, all that good stuff. Hopefully a Swayman contract. We'll have covered every step of the way once camp begins over at Boston.com and the Boston Globe. So you can follow me over there. If you want to follow me on Twitter, X, whatever it's called, you can do that at Conor Ryan _93.
Go do all that. That has been this week's Bruins Beat. Conor Ryan, Evan Marinofsky, Bruins Beat listeners. Have a great rest of your week.